Welcome students to this class of abdomen. Now abdomen, this is a part of the trunk below the diaphragm. Now from this is the sagittal section through the of the thorax, abdomen and upper part of the thigh. Now if you look at this is the diaphragm, and all of this cavity below the diaphragm shown in red and green. This whole of the cavity is the abdomen. So boundaries of the abdomen, if we were to see it, then the roof is formed by the undersurface of the diaphragm, and this diaphragm moves up and down with respiration, you already know that, and it alters the intrathoracic and intra-abdominal pressure. Now the floor is formed by actually the floor is also the floor of the pelvic cavity. It is formed by the pelvic diaphragm in the posterior part and the urogenital diaphragm in the anterior part. Now coming to the anterior wall, as you can see, this is the anterior, this is the posterior. The anterior wall, it is musculofibrous and formed by three flat muscles and their aponeurosis, and on either side of the midline on the anterior wall, this is strengthened by the rectus abdominis and pyramidalis muscles within the rectus sheath. This you will learn eventually. Okay, then comes the posterior wall. The posterior wall, as you can see, is osseo-musculo-fascial. So this is a rigid wall. The retroperitoneal organs, the principal blood vessels, the nerves, they all lie in the posterior wall. Now this abdominal cavity, this is again subdivided by this plane of pelvic inlet into an upper part represented by this reddish area. This is the abdomen proper. Okay, this is the abdomen proper, and the part below the pelvic inlet, as represented by this greenish area, this forms the pelvic cavity. Now this abdomen, it contains blood vessels, lymphatics, nerves, the GI tract, that is the gastrointestinal tract, and the other viscera associated with it, then the urogenital system. This is present in the abdominal cavity. The abdominal wall and the contained viscera, they are covered by the serous membrane, which is also known as the peritoneum. And the peritoneum, it has two parts or layers, the parietal and the visceral layers. Both these layers are continuous to enclose an enlarged potential space that is called the peritoneal cavity, and you are going to learn about them in the subsequent classes. Just to remember that in the male, the peritoneal cavity or the sac is a closed one, and in the female, the cavity is an open sac. For ready topographic references of the underlying structures, the abdomen is divided into 9 regions or quadrants. Okay, divided into 9 regions or quadrants by 2 horizontal and 2 vertical imaginary planes. The first horizontal plane is represented by the transpyloric plane of Addison, or simply the transpyloric plane. This passes in front through the, if note, these are the costal tips of the costal cartilages of the 7th, 8th, 9th and 10th ribs. Now this transpyloric plane in the front passes through the tips of both the 9th costal cartilage. Okay, and behind it passes through the lower border of the first lumbar vertebra. So this is the transpyloric plane. Then we have another horizontal plane, which is the transtubercular plane. This again is obtained by joining the tubercles of both the iliac crests. So in front it passes through the tubercles of both the iliac crests, and behind the plane passes through the upper part of the L5 spine, or the spine of the 5th lumbar vertebra. So this one is the transtubercular plane. This is the transtubercular plane. These are the two horizontal planes. Then we have the two vertical planes, the right and left lateral planes. Now these are obtained on both sides by joining of the midpoint. The first point is between the midpoint between the anterior superior iliac spine and the symphysis pubis. Here, similarly here, these are the lower points, and above, when traced above, this passes roughly or is continuous with the mid clavicular line. So these are the right and left lateral planes. These four imaginary planes divide the abdomen into 9 quadrants. As we have also already mentioned, there are 9 quadrants. So what are they? Actually the 9 quadrants again can be divided into upper zone, intermediary zone and the lower zone. Above the transpyloric plane is the upper zone. This upper zone contains three regions. One in the middle is the epigastric region. The one in the middle is the epigastric region, and on either side of the epigastric regions are, this is 2, this is 3. 2 and 3 are right and left hypochondriac regions. Okay, so in the upper zone we got 3 quadrants or regions, the epigastric in the middle and right and left on either side, right and left hypochondriac regions. Then in the intermediate zone we have in the middle the umbilical region. We have the umbilical region. and on either side of the umbilical region we have the fifth and sixth regions, which are the right and left lumbar regions. The right and left lumbar regions. Now coming to the lower zone, it has again three quadrants. The middle one is the hypogastric region. Hypogastric region. Remember, the first in the middle zone in the upper part was the epigastric zone, and the one in the middle in the lower zone is the hypogastric region, and on either side of the hypogastric region are the 8th and 9th quadrants. These are right and left iliac regions on either side of the hypogastric region. So we have 9 quadrants. Alright. Now there are two more important, actually 3 important landmarks we will discuss here before we go to the anterior abdominal wall. The linea alba. Okay, the linea alba is a linear depression in the median plane. It is the linear depression in the medial plane and it extends from the tip of the xiphoid process to the top of the symphysis pubis. This is the linea alba. Alright. Then we have two more curved grooves on either side of the linea alba. These are called the linea semilunaris. They extend from the pubic tubercle to tip of the 9th costal cartilage. From the pubic tubercle to the tip of the 9th costal cartilage. Similarly here. And note that it has a convexity laterally. This corresponds with the lateral border of the rectus abdominis muscle. This is the linea semilunaris. And then you have the umbilicus. This is the umbilicus. We will discuss about it in details later. The umbilicus is a puckered depression, as we can see in the median plane, and it lies usually in adults, it lies at the level of the intervertebral disc between the 3rd and 4th lumbar vertebrae. In children, it is at a lower level. Now, next topic is the anterior abdominal wall. So, to move into that topic, we first have to know the extent of the anterior abdominal wall. Above, it is limited by the right and left costal margins and the tip of the xiphisternum. Below, for both sides, okay, below it is limited by the iliac crest, fold of groin, the pubic tubercle, pubic crest and the symphysis pubis. Same for the other side. And laterally, it is the anterior wall is separated from the posterior abdominal wall by the downward prolongation of the mid axillary line. This is the region of the anterior abdominal wall. Now, the anterior abdominal wall. This wall is a firm and elastic wall. This consists of 8 layers. So, what are the 8 layers? From outside inwards, we get the first is the skin, then superficial fascia, the third, fourth and fifth are the 3 flat muscles and their aponeurosis. So, the third is the external oblique muscle and its aponeurosis. The fourth is the internal oblique muscle and its aponeurosis. The fifth is the transversus abdominis muscle and its aponeurosis. The sixth one is the fascia transversalis. The seventh layer is the extra peritoneal tissue, and finally coming to the eighth layer, it is the parietal peritoneum. So, these are the 8 layers of the anterior abdominal wall. From outside inwards, these are the skin, the superficial fascia, external oblique muscle and its aponeurosis, the internal oblique muscle and the aponeurosis, the transversus abdominis muscle and its aponeurosis, the external oblique, internal oblique and the transversus abdominis. These are the 3 flat muscles. Then comes the sixth layer, which is the fascia transversalis. Seventh is the extraperitoneal tissue and the eighth layer is the parietal peritoneum. And opposite the linea alba, the layers are reduced to 6 in numbers. Now, this seventh layer is the extraperitoneal tissue layer. This is important because all the abdominal viscera lie in this layer. Now, coming to the first layer from outside. So, skin, the anterior abdominal wall skin is thin and it is sensitive, more sensitive than skin of the posterior abdominal wall, and it has cleavage lines called the Langer's lines. Langer's lines, these are produced by bundles of collagen fibers of the dermis. And we have already mentioned that we have already discussed about the umbilicus, and the skin contains or has this surface depression, which is the umbilicus, and it is actually a cicatricial tissue that represents the fetal end of the umbilical cord. Okay. Then we have also discussed about the linea alba. Now, the skin of the anterior abdominal wall presents a median longitudinal groove overlying this linea alba. Okay. Similarly, there are 2 other curved grooves on each side of the linea alba overlying the linea semilunaris, and as usual they have a convexity directed laterally corresponding to the lateral border of the rectus abdominis muscle. Then we come to the superficial fascia. The superficial fascia up to the line joining the anterior superior iliac spines, up to the level of the line joining the two anterior superior iliac spines. Above that, the superficial fascia is a single layer. Below that layer, it splits into two layers. The superficial fatty layer, it divides into two layers. The superficial fatty layer, which is also called the Camper's fascia. Camper's fascia. This is the superficial fatty layer, and the deeper membranous layer, it is called the Scarpa's fascia. It is called the Scarpa's fascia. So, just note that superficial is Camper's fascia. C comes first. So, superficial Camper's fascia. The deeper is the membranous layer, which is the Scarpa's fascia, and there is a potential space between these two layers. And what are the structures that are present in between these two layers? They are the superficial epigastric, superficial circumflex, iliac, and superficial external pudendal vessels. The arteries, they are branches of the femoral artery, but the veins, they drain into the great saphenous vein. Also close to the inguinal ligament, around here, close to the inguinal ligament, the space, it contains superficial inguinal lymph nodes. Okay. Now this fascia of Camper, it is continuous with the subcutaneous fat of the adjoining area. Okay. And over the scrotum, as we descend towards here, over the scrotum, it is replaced by the involuntary dartos muscle. That fascia of Camper is replaced by the dartos muscle over the scrotum. And the fascia of Scarpa, which is the membranous elastic fibrous tissue, it has a few modifications. In the midline, it is attached to the linea alba, and is continued in front of the symphysis pubis as the fundiform ligament of the penis. Okay. Over the pubic crest, it is continuous with the dartos muscle of the scrotum and then forms the fascia of collis of the perineum. And over the inguinal ligament, it blends with the fascia lata of the thigh. Coming to the third layer, it is the first of the three flat muscles of the anterior abdominal wall, the external oblique muscle. Now the external oblique muscle, it arises by 8 fleshy slips from the outer surfaces and the lower borders of the lower 8 ribs. We can see it here. Okay. And the upper 4 slips, they interdigitate with the, if you see here, the upper 4 slips, they interdigitate with the serratus anterior, and the lower 4 slips, they interdigitate with the latissimus dorsi. Okay. Now insertion. The posterior most fibers. Okay, the most posterior fibers, they pass downward and vertically, and they are inserted as fleshy fibers to the anterior half of the outer lip of the ventral segment of the iliac crest. The posterior margin remains free. The posterior margin remains free and it forms the anterior boundary of the lumbar triangle. The remaining fibers, okay, they pass downward, forward and medially. You can see it here, downward, forward and medially, and in a forms more anteriorly and medially, it forms a F-shaped aponeurosis, a broad aponeurosis. Okay, the aponeurosis passes in front of the rectus abdominis muscle and forms the anterior wall of the rectus sheath. Just if we note here, see the cut ends of the external oblique. This is the anterior view of the abdomen, and note the broad aponeurosis of the external oblique, and it passes in front of the rectus abdominis muscle, forming the anterior wall of the rectus sheath and is inserted into the linea alba, which extends from the xiphoid process to the symphysis pubis. We already know that. The upper border of the aponeurosis is more or less horizontal. The upper border of the aponeurosis is more or less horizontal and is overlapped by the pectoralis muscle. This is the pectoralis muscle here. Pectoralis major overlaps the aponeurosis in the upper part. The lower border of the aponeurosis, so we can see that more clearly in this lateral view. The lower border of the aponeurosis, it is thickened and folded backwards, forms the inguinal ligament, extending from the anterior superior iliac spine to the pubic tubercle. Then it forms the lacunar ligament attached to the pecten pubis. Above the pubic tubercle, there is a triangular gap here in the aponeurosis, which is the superficial inguinal ring, and from the margin of this, it extends as the external spermatic fascia over the spermatic cord and testis. The nerve supply of the external oblique muscle is the ventral rami of the lower 6 thoracic nerves. Next, the fourth layer is the internal oblique muscle and its aponeurosis. Now we can see the cut ends of the external oblique in this lateral view, and this huge muscle and this aponeurosis is that of the internal oblique muscle. So origin is from the lateral two-third of the upper surface, lateral two-third of the upper surface of the inguinal ligament, and from the intermediate lip of the ventral segment of the iliac crest, and from the fusion of the anterior and middle layers of the thoracolumbar fascia. Okay. So these are the main three origins of the internal oblique muscle. Now how are they inserted? The inguinal fibers, they pass upward and medially. And they form the anterior wall of the inguinal canal here. Then they arch backwards, forming the roof of the canal. Finally, they turn downward and medially and become aponeurotic. Okay, this aponeurosis of the internal oblique blends with similar aponeurosis of transversus abdominis muscle and forms the conjoint tendon and gets inserted in the pubic crest and medial part of the pecten pubis. Now coming to the most posterior fibers. These pass vertically upwards as the fleshy fibers and are attached to the lower border of the lower 3 or 4 ribs and their costal cartilages. Remaining fibers of the internal oblique, they pass upward, forward and medially at right angles to the direction of the external oblique. We can see the external oblique, this is the cut end of the fleshy fibers of external oblique, and the internal middle fibers of the internal oblique, the fleshy fibers, these are at right angles with the to the direction of the fibers of the external oblique, and in the middle they end as the aponeurosis at the lateral border of the rectus abdominis muscle. If we see it here, see this is the cut end of the fleshy fibers of the internal oblique muscle. Okay, the middle fibers, they on the lateral border of this was the rectus abdominis muscle here, on the lateral border of the rectus abdominis muscle this becomes aponeurotic, and this aponeurosis splits into anterior and posterior lamella and encloses the rectus muscle and goes and joins or gets inserted in the linea alba. The splitting of the aponeurosis, it extends from the costal margin to the midpoint between the umbilicus and the symphysis pubis. Alright, below this midpoint between this level, with the midpoint between the umbilicus and symphysis pubis, below this level the aponeurosis does not split. Instead, it passes along with the transversus abdominis aponeurosis in front of the rectus muscle and is inserted in the linea alba. Okay. Here we'll have to mention that mention about the cremaster muscle, which are present in the male and is poorly developed in the female. Now these cremaster muscles are a series of irregular U-shaped loops of muscle fasciculi that are derived from the internal oblique and the transversus abdominis muscle. Okay. The nerve supply of the internal oblique muscle is by the ventral rami of the lower 6 thoracic nerves and the first lumbar nerve. Then coming to the next flat muscle, which is the transversus abdominis muscle. Now here you can see these are the cut fibers of the external oblique. Then here denoted by B, the cut fibers of the internal oblique muscle. Then the transversus abdominis muscle. The origin, this is the inguinal ligament, and from the lateral 1/3 of the upper surface of the inguinal ligament, few fibers originate. Then from the anterior 2/3 of the inner lip of the ventral segment of the iliac crest. Then from the thoracolumbar fascia at the lateral border of the quadratus lumborum, and also a few fibers from the inner surface of the lower 6 ribs and their costal margin, interdigitating with the origins of diaphragm. Now the inguinal fibers here, they arch backward and form the roof of the inguinal canal. Then they turn downward and medially become aponeurotic and form the conjoint tendon along with the aponeurosis of the internal oblique. Then get inserted in the pubic crest and middle part of the pecten pubis. The remaining of the fibers, you can see here, remaining fibers, they end in an aponeurosis that is narrow towards the xiphoid process, wide towards the umbilical region. Aponeurosis is finally inserted in the linea alba. The upper 3/4 of the aponeurosis reaches the linea alba by forming the posterior wall of the rectus sheath. The lower 1/4 of the aponeurosis reaches linea alba, forming the anterior wall of the same sheath. That is the anterior wall of the rectus sheath. Now, this transverse abdominis muscle is supplied by the ventral rami of the lower 6 thoracic nerves and the first lumbar nerve. The next layer is the not exactly layer, the aponeurosis of the transversus abdominis and the internal oblique. This is the transversus abdomen, this is the internal oblique muscle that is becoming aponeurotic here, and similarly the transversus abdominis muscle which is becoming aponeurotic towards the linea alba here. So, the fusion of the aponeurosis of the inguinal fibers of the internal oblique and the transversus abdominis here, they form the conjoint tendon. This is also known as the falx inguinalis. Falx inguinalis. This is inserted in the pubic crest and middle part of the pecten pubis. Now, 2/3 of the conjoint tendon is formed by transversus abdominis and 1/3 by the internal oblique. And its importance is that it forms medial half of the posterior wall of the inguinal canal. Now, this is the conjoint tendon. Okay. Now, medially it is continuous with the anterior wall of the rectus sheath, and laterally it has a free margin. Sometimes a fibrous band known as the interfoveolar ligament extends downwards from its lateral margin to the superior ramus of the pubis on the medial side of the deep inguinal ring. Now, the 3 flat muscles and their aponeurosis, they perform a few functions. First is retention. They maintain the tone of the muscles and they maintain the tone of the muscles of the abdomen and they retain the viscera in position. Then they give protection to the viscera from external injury, especially by the 2 rectal muscles. Then compression, that is they increase the intra-abdominal pressure and compress the viscera during the acts of vomiting, micturition, defecation. During compression, the diaphragm is pushed upwards, helping in expiration. And their action on the vertebral column, there are certain actions, that is when these muscles act from both sides, the lumbar vertebrae are flexed. And in case of unilateral action of the muscle, the trunk is bent laterally for causing lateral flexion. And when the external oblique of one side contracts simultaneously with the internal oblique of the other side, there is rotation of the trunk. Next, we come to the fascia transversalis. Okay, next we come to the fascia transversalis. So you can see this is the transversus abdominis muscle and becomes aponeurotic here towards the linea alba. The fascia transversalis is an areolar membrane. See, this is an areolar membrane which lines the inner surface of the transversus muscle, forms an endo-abdominal fascia. In front, the fascia covers the posterior surface of the linea alba and it becomes continuous with the similar fascia of the opposite side. Behind, it is continuous with the renal fascia along the lateral border of the kidney. Above, it is continuous with the ill-defined subdiaphragmatic fascia. And when traced below, it is a very well-defined structure becoming attached to from behind forwards to the inner lip of the iliac crest, then posterior margin of the inguinal ligament to the pecten pubis and the pubic crest behind the conjoint tendon. Here, this is the conjoint tendon behind this. Then it extends behind the inguinal ligament. Behind the inguinal ligament, it extends and forms the anterior wall of the femoral triangle. Femoral sheath. Extends downward behind the inguinal ligament as the anterior wall of the femoral sheath. The thickened lower part of the fascia transversalis forms the iliopubic tract. Okay, and it extends from the anterior superior iliac spine to the pubis. Now, the fascia transversalis presents an oval gap here which is known as the deep inguinal ring. The position or situation is 1.25 cm above the mid-inguinal point. 1.25 cm above the mid-inguinal point. Okay, and from the margin of the deep ring, a tubular prolongation of internal spermatic fascia extends over the spermatic cord and testis. Then comes the extraperitoneal tissue layer. This is actually a fibroareolar and fatty tissue layer, and this is traversed by a few structures from medial to the deep inguinal ring. Okay. So, what lies medial to the deep inguinal ring? First is the inferior epigastric artery. You can see here the inferior epigastric artery, which before it pierces the fascia transversalis. Then there is the obliterated umbilical artery, okay, passing towards the umbilicus. And finally, we have the median umbilical ligament extending from the apex of the urinary bladder to the umbilicus. The innermost layer is now the eighth layer is the parietal peritoneum. Now, below the umbilicus, we can see this infraumbilical part of the anterior abdominal wall. Below the umbilicus, this is the umbilicus. Okay, it presents 5 folds. This parietal peritoneum, it presents 5 folds. Okay, we already mentioned the median umbilical fold. Okay, this is the median umbilical fold, and this contains the median umbilical ligament. All right, the median umbilical ligament. Then there are a pair of medial umbilical folds. Okay, this was median, then medial, and these Medial umbilical folds, they each contain the obliterated umbilical artery. Okay. Sorry. Okay. So the middle one was the median umbilical ligament containing fold, the median umbilical fold. Then on either side the medial umbilical folds containing the pair of medial umbilical folds containing what? The obliterated umbilical artery. Alright. And then there are a pair of lateral umbilical folds. Alright. There are a pair of lateral umbilical folds that contain the inferior epigastric artery. So we can draw the inferior epigastric artery. We already know now that the inferior epigastric artery lies to the medial of the deep inguinal ring, and the deep inguinal ring is 1.25 centimeter above the mid inguinal point. Alright. So this is the lateral inguinal lateral umbilical folds on either side containing the pair of inferior epigastric arteries. Alright. Now between and around these folds that we just discussed, the peritoneum now gets divided into 6 fossa or depression. So there are a pair of supravesical fossa. Okay, supravesical fossa 1 and 2. So 1 and 2 are supravesical fossa. So we can see they lie between the median, here we can see median and the median and medial umbilical folds. Alright. Then we have a pair of medial inguinal fossa. Okay, a pair of 3 and 4 are medial inguinal fossa. Plural is fossae, F-O-S-S-A-E. Okay, so these are the 3 and 4 are the pair of medial inguinal fossa. So they lie between the medial and the lateral umbilical folds, medial and lateral umbilical folds. Alright, and then we have a pair of lateral inguinal fossa. 4, so 5 and 6. 5 and 6 are a pair of lateral inguinal fossa. Actually these are all plural, fossa. Lateral inguinal fossa that lies outside the lateral umbilical fold, lies outside the lateral umbilical fold overlying the position of the deep inguinal ring. Okay, and you will again learn about, when you learn about the inguinal canal and the hernias, about the oblique and the direct hernia. Okay, still it's worth the mention, when the inguinal hernia enters the inguinal canal through the lateral inguinal fossa, it is known as the oblique hernia. Okay, and when the hernia enters the canal through the supravesical or the medial inguinal fossa, these regions, it is called the direct hernia. Alright, and there is also something called the inguinal triangle of Hasselbalch. Alright, from this figure, in the peritoneal triangle on the posterior wall of the inguinal canal, this triangle is bounded laterally by the inferior epigastric artery, medially by the lateral border of the rectus muscle. See, this is the lateral border of the rectus muscle. So, medially the lateral border of rectus muscle, laterally the inferior epigastric artery, and below the inguinal ligament. Okay, this is the inguinal triangle of Hasselbalch or Hasselbalch's triangle.